Hello and welcome to Diecast Diaries. I'm Dan, and a few weeks ago I did a two-part review of the Ertl Force 1 range of diecast aircraft, and in those videos I mentioned that prior to the introduction of that range in I think 1986, the only other toy aircraft that were readily available were Matchbox Skybusters, and although I did say in those videos that compared to the Force 1 aircraft, Skybusters were a lot more basic and certainly smaller, I did also say that I was still quite a fan of that range. And over the years, from when I was little up to now, I have amassed a reasonable collection of them. I think I've actually got sort of about 100 different ones from the Skybusters range. Now, as that's clearly kind of too many to go through in one video, similar to the Force 1 videos, I'm going to split this review into two parts. So in this first one, the initial 16 models that Skybusters that were released by Matchbox under the Skybusters name in 1973, I have examples of 14 of those. So we're going to have a look at those castings, plus also all the different variations of those castings that I've got. And then in part two, we're going to have a look at the castings that came out from sort of 1976 onwards, up to and including the sort of the present day, and again looking at the different variations. As befits kind of my sort of sphere of interest, really, the vast majority of the Skybusters I've got are military ones. They did a nice mix of military and civilian. I have a few civilian ones. The airliners were the ones I was least interested in, even though they did quite a large range of those in some quite eye-catching liveries. Airliners aren't really anything I've ever been sort of really interested in. I have got a few. The ones I've got have simply obtained by them being included in mixed lots of other Skybusters where there were some I was genuinely interested in. I think I had originally thought about selling them all, but then I thought they're quite nice models and they are all in authentic schemes, so I have decided to keep them. So I have got a few of the airliners. As I say, there are a handful of other civilian aircraft I've got as well, but the vast majority of them are military. Now, the first one released by Skybusters was quite an unusual one, really. It was actually the Learjet, and it was released. This is an example of it. It's pictured on my backdrop there. That's what the original one looked like, a sort of yellow fuselage, white wings, and a German sort of registration on the wings. And it's been released over the years in a number of different liveries. They've done a Federal Express one. There was a JCB one that came in a special gift set. I believe there was one in kind of Royal Mail data post type liveries and like an eye-catching red scheme. But it wasn't until I think 1989 that they released this one that it became one that I was quite interested in. So I should just point out that the vast majority of the Skybusters I've got are unboxed, but there are a handful I've got that do need unboxing. So we'll kind of do those as we go through them. But yeah, in 1989, this one was released. Now, I think this was actually a US-only release. Certainly, this came from an American eBay listing a good number of years ago. So this is the basic sort of Learjet casting, but done, as I say, a very nice US Air Force scheme. The US Air Force do use these in their service. It's known as the C-21. It's kind of used for kind of VIP transport, or I think sort of fast transport of certain critical things, I guess. There are some based in Europe, or there certainly were at Ramstein Air Base. But yeah, it sort of was done in a very nice scheme, very sort of authentic scheme that Skybusters have done. One feature of the Skybusters range, I think, compared to a lot of the others, certainly like the Battle Kings and that, is that initial releases were kind of done in sort of quite unrealistic, quite garish metallic schemes in some cases. And then later releases were done in kind of much more authentic military schemes. And this is certainly one of those. So this gives you kind of a general idea of what the Skybusters range is like. So the vast majority of the castings, certainly the earlier ones, are all metal. The top and bottom is all metal. The only plastic bits you've got are obviously the cockpit glass and the wheels. Initial releases had sort of very kind of ungainly looking wire undercarriage. I do have a couple of the really early examples, so when we come to those, I'll be able to show you what that undercarriage looked like. But I think it was found that wasn't kind of sturdy enough. So not too far into the range, this type wheel was introduced, and this would be in use for a good number of years. And then I think the only upgrade to it has really been replacing the nose wheel with a single nose wheel that kind of looks a little bit better. I think that was one of the worst parts of the range, as well as the fact that the wheels, of course, are fixed. There's no way you can have kind of retractable undercarriage on these. They kind of look a bit big. The wheels always look a bit ungainly. Some looked better than on others. This one's not the worst, it has to be said, but yeah. But yeah, other than that, the pretty sort of robust castings. The cockpit glass could always be a little bit vulnerable, and unfortunately, on a couple of the ones I've got, the cockpit glass is missing. But generally, they were pretty robust. So that's the US Air Force version of the Learjet. There was another version of the US Air Force one done they did a few Skybusters as colour changes where you kind of put them in sort of warm water and they change colour, and the US Air Force one was chosen for that, and it's kind of in sort of almost like a pinky colour, it looks like, in the packet. But that's not one I've got. But yeah, so that's the US Air Force Learjet. As I say, I'm pretty sure that was only released in the US. The second one released, again, a bit of an unusual one. It's the A7D Corsair 2, to give it its proper title. So quite an obscure aircraft for Matchbox in England to have done. It was, at that point in 1973, it would have been in service, I think, only with the US Navy and the US Air Force. A few number of foreign air forces did use it, but it certainly wouldn't have been a common sight in the UK skies. So yeah, quite a random one for Matchbox to pick. And you can see this is an example of the kind of garish early type colours that the Matchbox did. So like quite a bright metallic green colour. But again, it's a really solid casting. This is obviously the slightly later release with the more chunky wheels, as I say, compared to the original sort of early wire ones. But yeah, no kind of ordnance or anything like that underneath. It would just have to be a bit too fragile. Some of the later releases did have some like plastic missiles, and obviously we'll come to those in time. But yeah, so that's the first release. Now, the stickers, they have at least given it sort of US stickers, US insignia. Unfortunately, this is quite a common thing. They've just done it on both wings, where I've kind of said before in other videos where it should only have it on the upper wing. The insignia on the tail, the LA282, my guess would be that is just a generic one that Matchbox have come up with. But it does look quite similar to the sort of tail markings that a lot of US Navy aircraft have. Or US Air Force, that matter, they have like a couple of big letters that sometimes denote the squadron or the base that they're assigned to. But yeah, I'm pretty sure they will be generic. So that's the first release of the A7 Corsair 2. And then that was replaced by this one, which is exactly the same in terms of the stickers. You've got the star and bar on both wings again, but it's in a better looking, I would say, metallic blue colour. It's still not particularly realistic in terms of colour schemes, but it's I think it looks better. One thing I've struggled with, although I've been able to find the release dates for the initial casting, like when the first version of the casting came out, I've not been able to find dates for when subsequent variations came out. There's not a huge amount of information out there. Now, a number of years ago, I think it was through an eBay listing, I did find this, sort of a home-produced booklet, if you like, the Skybusters range of diecast aircraft. It's basically been produced by this person here with obviously a couple of contributors. It's pretty good. It goes into like a reasonable amount of detail about individual castings. So it lists all the ones that were known at the time. This particular one dates from the early 2000s. But unfortunately, it doesn't give a date next to each of them to say when they came out. So all I can say is that sometime in, I'm guessing the late 70s, mid to late 70s, this version was released. But yeah, unfortunately, can't give an exact date. So that's the second release of the A7. And then the last release, I think this one may have been USA only. This is by far the best and is actually one of my favourites of the entire range. This is in an actual authentic US Air Force scheme. It's in like the sort of, they came into service in the Vietnam War sort of quite late on. And this is in the sort of camouflage that they would have been used there. So you've got like sort of white underneath and then this sort of 3-colour camouflage on the top. Really nicely done by Matchbox. And you've just got USAF on the starboard wing, the one insignia, so that's correct. And then sort of what I'm guessing are correct sort of tail markings. I've got AF obviously for Air Force. So I think this is really nice. This is another one that I think appeared in the colour changes range, but I'm pretty sure this may have been USA only. And I'm pretty sure that's where I got this one from, another sort of purchase off eBay a good while ago. So yeah, that's definitely my favourite, certainly of the three A7s, and yeah, one of my outright favourites of the entire range. So that's the A7 Corsair. So that's all three. Apart from the colour change, those are the only versions of the A7. The third one released is the first civilian one. So it's the Airbus A300. This, as I say, is one that I wasn't ever really particularly bothered about. It's one that I just obtained. It was in a mixed lot of other Skybusters, as I say. That's how all the airliners I've got, that's how I've come by them. So now, unusually with this one, this was introduced in 1973, as I say, along with the rest of these. It was deleted in 1979, and then it was reinstated in 1982, but given a different model number. and it's kind of been in production ever since. Obviously, it's been in a fair old number of liveries over the years. I think the very first one was in an Air France scheme. Now, this is a much later casting. I think this is one that actually dates from about 2000, 2001 maybe. And you can see this has actually got the later design of nose wheel, where it's like a single wheel. That's what kind of all the newer ones tend to have. But again, pleasingly, although this is a later version, it's still all metal. Even the engines are all metal. So yeah, pretty nice. And yeah, as I say, I had thought about selling the airliners because, as I say, they're not something I'm really that interested in. But they are quite nice. They are, a genuine part of the range, and they're all in proper, authentic liveries. So I decided I'd keep hold of them. But they're certainly not one I'm trying to get all the variations of. So that's the Airbus A300. One feature of the range is, although in terms of things like the airliners, they would do quite a few, some of the other aircraft that they could have done lots of different liveries of, they didn't. And then there were some that they did quite randomly. And then another random aircraft for Matchbox to do was this one, which is the French Mirage F1. It would have been a current fighter plane for the time. Mirages tend to be, they've got a whole series of aircraft known as the Mirage, and most of them tend to be kind of deltas. They're sort of quite well known as producing like a range of delta-winged fighter aircraft. So it's quite unusual that Matchbox chose to go for the Mirage F1, which is a sort of far more conventional one. Again, it's a reasonably obscure one. You can see this is the fourth aircraft released, and we've still not had any British aircraft yet. Now, this is one that has had a fair number of variations over the years. So it was initially released in this sort of metallic red colour. Again, not particularly realistic, and I think they were supposed to be French Air Force roundels on the wings, but look a bit too much like RAF ones, to be honest. Similar to a lot of other Matchbox ranges, like the Battle Kings one, there are dozens and dozens of minor variations that you can get with Skybusters. They're not ones that I'm out and trying to collect every single one. The ones that I've got, again, it's merely been a case similar to the airliners. They've been included in amongst a lot of other aircraft, and I thought they were a duplicate. I've had a quick look over both of them, and then I've realised, actually, that's a variation, so I've decided to keep it. But it's certainly not something I'd set out to get in the first place. It would just be too many of them. So this Mirage is actually one of them. So in another lot of aircraft, I got this one, and I initially thought they were exactly the same. But you can see they've actually got a completely different fin flash. So it's the same on both sides. So as that was a variation as far as I know, may have been a mistake in the factory, not really sure, I decided to keep both of them. But it's certainly, as I say, not something I'm setting out to do. It's if I happen to get any as I'm collecting others, I'll keep them. But other than that, not that bothered. The Mirage was then brought out in a very similar looking scheme, but this one's not metallic. It's a sort of slightly lighter red and kind of just a plain red. But other than that, it is exactly the same. Then we've got this one. Now you can see, at least with this one, they've decided to give it some different markings. It's actually got Spanish Air Force markings. The Spanish Air Force were one of the users of this aircraft. I'm guessing that the squadron badge on the tail is authentic. I'm not sure the actual colour scheme is. It's sort of strange orange colour. But it's nice to get some different markings on the wings and what look like kind of fairly authentic military markings with the Spanish Air Force and sort of individual aircraft number 12218. That's another Mirage F1. And then there was this one released afterwards, which is in just kind of it doesn't give any clue as to what country it belongs to, just says Marines on it, on the fuselage. I would guess again it'd be something like Spain again. It's got ZE164. I'm guessing a lot of these numbers and that are just kind of spurious that kind of Matchbox have come up with. Again, it doesn't look like a particularly authentic military scheme, but it's nice that I say it does have Marines on it, and it does have some kind of a squadron badge on the tail again. That's another Mirage F1. This next one is one of the few that have actually had a bit of a quality control failure with Matchbox. It was bought brand new. It's what I bought a good number of years ago. One I had when I was little, and the wheels broke off quite easily. They're normally, as I say, pretty robust. So as the wheels came off, but the rest of the aircraft was in quite a good condition, I've decided to keep it. At least this one kind of looked like it was flying. The scheme, it's virtually the same as that used by the Patrouille de France, which is the French equivalent of the Red Arrows. As far as I'm aware, I don't think they've ever used the Mirage F1, but it's certainly a nice eye-catching scheme. Looks really good, that one. So, yeah, that's one I kind of need to replace at some point. But yeah, that's one of the rare ones I've actually had any kind of an issue with. So that's another Mirage F1. And then we have this one. I think this is definitely the best of the bunch, in like a really good French Air Force camouflage scheme. It's got the proper French Air Force roundels and a really nice green and grey scheme. Now this particular one is from 1999. You can see there's a few other aircraft from the range then. So Skybusters, they did keep the castings going for a fair while, it has to be said. We'll just get this one out. There we go. That's definitely, you can see, as you know, by the sort of late 90s, the camouflage schemes they were coming out with, or the markings and that, were really sort of quite authentic. I've no doubt that this is a proper, genuine scheme for, I mean, it's fairly basic. There's no kind of squadron markings on it as such, but there is an aircraft number on the side. You've got the sort of no step markings on the wings, and as I say, the roundels. And the camouflage certainly looks correct for a French Air Force. So that's a really nice one. I say that's definitely the favourite of the Mirages. And then the last one that I've got, this was one from 2001, and it's in a sort of, initially looks sort of quite garish, and it looks like a colour scheme that Matchbox have made up, but these tiger markings are actually sort of probably authentic. There's a thing that NATO used to do, I don't know if they still do it, where any squadron from any air force that had a tiger as part of its badge, they were invited, and I think it was on an annual basis, to it was like a squadron get-together, and one aircraft, I think, from each squadron would always be sent in some form of tiger camouflage. Sometimes it was just a tail fin, or like a little bit of trim on maybe the wingtips or something, or occasionally they just went the whole way, all the way, and did the entire aircraft in tiger scheme marking. So it's certainly made for some eye-catching schemes. So as far as I'm aware, this could well be a genuine scheme. I'm guessing that there has been a Mirage F1 squadron that had a tiger on its badge, and that was probably what the tiger looked like. And obviously, they tended to feature the squadron badge on the tail or something. So whilst it may seem like it's a scheme that Matchbox have made up, that is quite probably an authentic tiger meat scheme. So that's the last of the Mirages that I've got. Now, what I was saying to that one is, obviously, the Mirage F1, reasonably obscure aircraft, but Matchbox decided to do it in quite a number of liveries. The next one that they brought out was this one. It's the F-104 Starfighter. Now, this was an aircraft. It was quite a controversial aircraft. It was quite a dangerous aircraft, killed quite a number of pilots. But despite that, it actually saw service in quite a large array of air forces. Yet, unfortunately, Matchbox only ever released it in Royal Canadian Air Force markings. That is correct. They were one of the air forces that used it. But yeah, there's a whole host of, obviously there was the US Air Force themselves. There's a whole host of European air forces that used them. Again, some in quite colourful markings. But yeah, unfortunately, Matchbox didn't do that, and it kind of seems a little bit of a shame, really. Now, this is one of the ones I've got that's got the early sort of wire type undercarriage. You can see it's a lot flimsy. It actually looks better in a way because it looks sort of less bulky than the other ones. It looks far more realistic in a way, but you can kind of see there's no way that's going to be anywhere near as robust as the later type. So it was changed, but that's what the original undercarriage looked like. The actual casting itself's pretty good. The Starfighter's a very sleek aircraft, so it's one that it looks a little bit chunky in Skybusters form, and certainly with the wheels, but it's nice. But yeah, as I say, it's just a bit of a pity that they didn't do any more schemes in that one. So that's the early release, and then that's just the same aircraft again, but with the later wheels. Again, other than that, exactly the same. The only other version they did of the Starfighter was this one, again, in Royal Canadian Air Force markings. Really nice scheme. I really like the sort of red, and the silver looks really smart. But yeah, I'll just say that it's just a pity they could have done so many others. And then I've got a slight variation. This is again one that just happened to be included. It's not one I was out to get specifically. It's just exactly the same aircraft, but with a clear canopy. That's the F-104 Starfighter. And then, still notice at this point, we've still not had any British aircraft at all. And the next one doesn't change that at all. It's the MiG-21. Obviously, would have been probably the main Russian interceptor, Russian jet fighter at the time, sort of early to mid-70s. So it got a nice authentic Russian markings, the red stars on the wings and on the tail fin, which is what Russian Air Force aircraft tended to have. It's pretty good. We captured the shape of it pretty well. I don't think the scheme again is sort of particularly realistic, but then this is a this being the initial release, you could say the same about a lot of the other castings. So that's the first release of the MiG-21. Now this is another one that has been used by a lot of different air forces. Now thankfully Matchbox have at least done a number of different colour schemes on this one. So there's a couple of other Russian ones. Got this later one in this sort of nice overall silver scheme, the number 23. This one looks far more authentic. Nice simple scheme, but I think some of them look all the better for it, having sort of nice simple colour schemes. Now you can see as well later on a lot of the markings were tampoed on. You can see on this early one they're quite obviously stickers and suffered from, depends on how much care the person in the factory was giving them when they were applying them. Whereas tampos, these are obviously nice and straight. So that's another MiG-21. Then we've got another Russian one in a really nice sort of Russian-style camouflage scheme. So yet again, I would say this is an authentic colour scheme. You've got the individual aircraft number. Again, you've got the latest style nose wheel on this one. That's a very nice one. And then we actually have a different Air Force depicted here. We've actually got the Finnish Air Force, one of many users of the MiG-21. It's probably one of the most widely used fighter aircraft in history. So it is nice. I mean, there's a whole host that Matchbox could have done but didn't, but it is nice that they did do a few in sort of non-Russian schemes. So yeah, again, I'm guessing that is a genuine number on the side and a genuine squadron badge. That's probably my favourite of the MiGs. Yeah, obviously not often you get an aircraft in Finnish Air Force markings. And then the last of the MiG-21s I've got, and this one dates from 2001, is an Indian Air Force one in kind of very eye-catching camouflage, but again, I'm pretty sure it is authentic. It's got the sort of correct Indian Air Force roundels, all tampo printed, and then just the Indian flag on the tail with the aircraft number. And again, obviously, it's the later model undercarriage. There are some other versions of this. I believe there's a Romanian Air Force one, and probably a couple of others as well. But yeah, that's all the ones that I've got. So that's the MiG-21. And then we go back to World War II. There weren't many World War II aircraft at all. I think there was actually only 3 that were included as part of the range, this being the first one of them. So it's the Junkers 87, obviously far better known as the Stuka. This is another one where it's got the early type undercarriage. There's, of course, the whole thing with Skybusters having fixed undercarriage. This is one aircraft where it doesn't matter, because also the real aircraft did. Of course, this being a model from the 70s, there were no issues back then about putting swastikas on toys. There was also Dinky Toys did a really good model toy Stuka in the 70s, and that also had the swastika on the tail fin. Obviously, you couldn't really get away with that now. It's just got the normal German crosses on the wings. An unusual kind of bottle green colour. I think it's the same green as the first of the A7 Corsairs. The proportions are pretty good, and again, this early type undercarriage looks a bit better, though it does look a little bit wonky on this one, it has to be said. So that's the first version of the Stuka. I've got the later version here, fitted with the later wheels. Unfortunately, this is one of the aircraft I've got that's missing its cockpit. It was like that when I got it. Again, it just came in a mixed slot, and because it was a slight variation, I've just decided to keep it, but it would be obviously good to get one with a cockpit. And then the only other version of the Stuka they did, this one came out in the late 80s, was this one. You can see by this point, they've replaced the swastika with the normal German cross. Obviously, no chance of selling it otherwise. Now this one's in a sort of half desert scheme, but it's quite unusual. It's got like the upper fuselage is all black, but it looks quite good, and a nice job of the camouflage on the wings. It's just kind of a shame that they didn't do the whole aircraft like that. I think it would have looked an awful lot better. But yeah, so that's the other version of the Stuka. And then finally, we come to our first British aircraft, and of course, it has to be the Spitfire. So surprisingly, this is another example of an aircraft that could have done a huge amount of variations of different colour schemes, different even nationalities of countries that flew it. But even just sticking to the RAF ones, they could have done a lot. Whereas, as far as I'm aware, there are only about 3 different ones that were available. So this is the first one in kind of an unusual green and gold scheme. The actual sort of shape of the aircraft they've captured pretty well. This is another one where it's the early version with the wire wheels. I think they look pretty good on this one. But it's a shame they didn't include like the roundel on the side of the fuselage, as that was such a feature of, along with the sort of large code letters on the side. Even the sort of fin flash on the tail or something would have been nice. But yeah, so that's the first release of the Spitfire. And then sometime in the 80s, they released this one. This one is in a much better, this is obviously a desert colour scheme. But again, it would have been really nice to have the roundels on the side of the fuselage, or again, the fin flash on the tail fin or something. But yeah, it just seems odd that, especially with it being a Spitfire, that they didn't do kind of more variations. The only other one I'm actually aware of, and this was something that was, I don't think it was something that Matchbox were originally going to release, but in 1990, to coincide with the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Britain, there was a promotion that Kellogg's Cornflakes did, where you could send off tokens and you could either get model Spitfire, model Hurricane, which we'll just come to in a minute, or a 3D cardboard airfield. Now, these were actually made by, although they look obviously very similar to Skybusters, these were actually made by Tonka Polystill, a company that I'm slightly familiar with, but more in terms of model cars, certainly not in terms of sort of little aircraft like this. Now, the demand for these was so great that Matchbox, as they got a Spitfire casting, were actually drafted in to produce some. So they were the Matchbox casting, but in this colour scheme. There is some slight differences between the two. So if you look at the exhaust, you've got the much finer detail on the Matchbox one than on this one. But this is the Tonka Polystill version. So technically, I say it's not a Skybuster, but I kind of thought I should include it. Certainly the construction of them is virtually identical, I would say. And then the Hurricane, just for completeness' sake, that's the Hurricane there. This one was never produced by Matchbox. This is the Tonka Polystill one, but gives you an idea of what a Skybuster's Hurricane could have looked like, at least. So I'll just put that over to one side. Then we go on to another civilian aircraft. So this is the Cessna 402. This is one that I did genuinely get when I was little. I think I just quite liked the look of it. I thought, although it was civilian, I quite liked the twin engines and the fuel tanks on the end of the wings. I thought it looked quite smart. The first release of this, I think, was in like a metallic green and white scheme. This is one that dates from, I would say, the mid to late 80s. But yeah, it's a particularly nice one, that. Again, it's another one I think has appeared in a number of different schemes. But yeah, one of the few civilian aircraft I've got, but quite an eye-catching one. Put that there. Then I mentioned when I was talking about this particular Mirage F1 that it was normally it was the Future de France actually used Alpha jets, and that's what this is. This is the first release of it in a Luftwaffe scheme. Again, you've got the early wire type undercarriage. This is another one that they could have released in a whole host of colours. There were a few variations. This is the only one that I've got. They did do a version in this colour scheme, so I'm guessing that was supposed to be a proper Patrouille de France one. And there was one in a kind of a red, white and blue, I think it had RAF rounds on it, which wouldn't be correct. It looked quite smart. But I think that's it. I don't think they did any others. It would have been a shame if, it would have been nice if they'd carried on doing this one and maybe done it in the sort of modern French camouflage colours like this Mirage here. But I do particularly like the Alpha Jet, the Skybusters Alpha Jet. I think they've captured the look pretty well. And I think, I'm not sure how authentic the red and white is, whether the Luftwaffe did ever operate any like that, but I quite like it. I always think it looks quite smart. Then another fairly obscure one, it's the A4 Skyhawk. Again, this is another one with the early type undercarriage. This is another one that I don't think Matchbox took full advantage of. The casting's quite nice. You've got the fuel tanks under the wings. Would have been still in frontline service at the time. It's a type that was heavily used in Vietnam by both the US Navy and US Marines. So obviously this one's in Navy markings. The only other version that they did, sadly, is actually looks exactly the same, but you've just got a slight variation with the stickers. You've got some markings on the wings, and this one says Marines on it. But other than that, it is identical. This is another one that's sadly missing the canopy. And of course, this one has the later style undercarriage. But given again, it's one that's been fairly widely used by a number of different air forces and navies. It's a shame, and also the US Navy themselves and Marines did quite a number of eye-catching schemes. It's kind of a shame that this one wasn't sort of kind of done in any other variations, really. So that's the A4 Skyhawk. Then another civilian one, another airliner. It's the DC10. So although, obviously, as I say, all the rest of these is released in 1973, this is a much more recent one. I think this is, again, from about 2000, 2001. Again, it just came in a lot of other Skybusters, and it's quite an eye-catching scheme, quite nice. DC-10's an iconic aircraft, so it's quite a nice one to have. But yeah, that's again, as I say, it's been released in a number of different airline liveries over the years. But yeah, so that's the DC-10. And one thing I found out quite recently is that there's actually this version of it. Now, this is actually obviously supposed to be the military KC10 extender in-flight refueling tanker. So at first glance, this looks like it's in kind of genuine US Air Force markings, the sort of overall grey. But if you look closely, it just says NBAF, which I'm guessing is just Matchbox Air Force. And then you look at it, as I say, you can see it has just got kind of very generic markings on the fuselage. Now, although all of these were kind of, the mould was originally from 1973, it obviously had a redesign at some point. This one, it does actually say 2000 underneath it. And as soon as you pick this one up, it's far lighter. And you can see when you've got the difference in colours, only the upper fuselage and tail are metal. All of the lower fuselage, the wings, and the horizontal stabilisers are all plastic. So obviously, it must have been around 2000, they decided to change the production method for this one. Obviously, the same, it can be said for a lot of Matchbox cars, a lot of Matchbox models. So generally, though, it's still nice, and it's nice, although they are generic Matchbox Air Force markings, it is nice to get what is obviously a military version. Unfortunately, this one is missing its nose wheel. It was picked up second hand, but it's nice to have an example of a KC10. It's not a common aircraft at all. And then we move on to another American aircraft, but it is at least one that was in widespread British use, both with the RAF and the Royal Navy. So it's the F4 Phantom. This was the initial release of it in an RAF scheme, but again, not a very realistic RAF scheme, a sort of dark red and white. It's a shame, really, that there's a number of... I mean, the Phantoms are good in a way that there have been some nice variations of it, but again, it's another one where they could have done an awful lot more. It's kind of a strange one for them to do as the first release, really. Phantoms had quite a long life with Skybusters, so the next release I've got is actually this one in a very nice kind of US Navy scheme. We'll just get this one out. I'm not sure, again, if this one was an American-only release. Would make sense with it being in the sort of US Navy markings. Now this one, with it having the 100, I'm thinking this is Showtime 100, which was a famous US Navy Phantom from the Vietnam War that was quite successful at shooting down MiGs. I think it shot down a sort of a reasonable number of them. So I think it is a fairly sort of well-known one. It would make sense for Matchbox to do one. I've not sort of just checked to see if the squadron markings match up, but I'm guessing that's the one that it is. But it's in a really nice, really nice US Navy scheme. You can see by this point, as well as the actual schemes being more authentic, there's a lot more markings appeared. You've got the Navy titling on the side, the squadron marking on the wing, as well as the tail, the individual aircraft number there, and a nicely done star and bar there, and also these sort of markings around the cockpit. I think they look so much better. So I think this one dates from about 99, and then we've got the others. I've got three more Phantoms. These all date from around about 2001. This is a really eye-catching one in the US Navy Blue Angel scheme. The Blue Angels did use the F4 Phantom for a number of years. I think it must have been quite an expensive aircraft for them to operate, and obviously not as manoeuvrable as some other types that they've used. But yeah, really nice scheme this, and yeah, totally authentic. So that's the US Navy Blue Angels F4 Phantom. And I say that's from 2001. And we've got another eye-catching and genuine scheme here, which is the bicentennial scheme. So this was from 1976. So it's kind of a shame that Matchbox didn't do this one a bit earlier. Again, it's a genuine scheme. A number of American aircraft were decorated in similar sort of patriotic colour schemes to mark the bicentennial in 1976. And this was actually a US Navy Phantom. It does say US Navy on the side, it's just quite difficult. So there you go, in yellow. And it says bicentennial above it, and then VX4 being the squadron that it was from. And it's got the sort of eagle's face painted around the nose. Well, that's a really nice one. So yeah, those are both from 2001. And then I've actually got one from 2002, which is another US Navy one. Now, I'm not sure that this scheme is authentic. It's kind of a sort of an unusual pale blue. But it's nice. I think the star and bar doesn't look quite as good on this one. The actual bar bits look too long. Other than that, the markings on it are really nice. You've got the sort of little red nose step markings on the wings. What could be genuine markings on the tail, I'm not quite sure. But yeah, I just think that the blue does seem a little bit unusual. There are two other Phantoms that I'd really like to get. They actually did a grey Royal Navy one, which is in really nice. It looks really nice. And they did a sort of green and grey camouflage Royal Air Force one as well. They're probably at the top of my wants list ones I'd like to get, but do seem quite difficult to get hold of. And then the last two models for as part of this 16 that were released, there are two that I don't have, which was the Boeing 747 and there was a Cessna 210 sort of single-engine light aircraft. But the last one of the ones I do have is this one. So this is the last of the World War II aircraft. So it's an F4U Corsair, but this one would actually be sort of in post-war markings, as it's got the red stripes. This could represent one as used in the Korean War. They were widely used then. So it was a US Navy and US Marines fighter. Distinctive cranked wings, similar to the Stuka. Very successful aircraft. One of the kind of the best sort of piston-engined aircraft of the war, and went on to have a reasonable life post-war as well. As I say, saw service in Korea, where one of them actually shot down a MiG-15. So the actual initial release of this, although it's kind of a similar style of finish to the others with the metallic paint scheme, actually looked pretty good on this one. This being a Navy aircraft. The second release they did of it, and this is the only other variation of it, is really unusual. It's in this sort of orange scheme. I do like the fact that rather than it having 2 stars and bars, it does actually say Navy on the other sticker there, but I'm not really sure if this orange scheme is what that's meant to represent. Whether it was, I know in the later life, planes like this would probably have been turned into target drones and things like that, and you can imagine it being painted a high visibility colour for that sort of purpose. So whether it's something like that, I'm not really sure. It's quite nice, I guess, but it's just a bit unusual. But that's the only other version of the Corsair that they did. So that's the initial 16 castings that Matchbox brought out. As I say, unfortunately, I don't have an example of the 747, and I don't have an example of the Cessna 210. But that's all the other ones that came out in 1973. Some of those have carried on and had quite long production lives. Some of them were discontinued sort of sometime in the 80s and have never kind of resurfaced again. As I say, the A4 Skyhawk is one of those, which is a real shame. As I say, they could have really done. It would have been really nice if they carried on doing that one and could have done it in sort of colour schemes similar to this. Would have looked really good, but unfortunately not. So I'll leave the video there for now. And then, as I say, in the second part of the video, we'll have a look at all of the other subsequent castings that came out from 1976 onwards, up to and including the present day. So, in the meantime, please do like, share, subscribe, and comment, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye.